So then, without waiting any longer, we'll begin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. We're really honored with your presence and with our special guests. Ryan Vizzions is an independent photojournalist who has covered, among many other events, the Standing Rock protest movement, Black Lives Matter protests, and most recently, the Tennessee Three, the state representatives wrongly expelled for protesting Republicans' inaction on gun violence in Tennessee. Ryan gained worldwide notoriety with a series of viral photographs during the Standing Rock protest. One photo in particular, Defend the Sacred, took the world by storm in November of 2016, reaching over 100 million people in 1 week, helping draw attention to the issues taking place at Standing Rock. Ryan self-published No Spiritual Surrender, a dedication to the Standing Rock movement, and we do have a few copies available if you'd like to look at it after the talk. In late 2020, in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, Ryan embarked on a long-term, multi-year project traveling across the United States in a van to create photography books documenting the United States of America. We are truly honored to have an additional special guest joining us from New York City via Zoom. Stephanie Keith is a news photographer specializing in political and religious subcultures and working primarily for the New York Times, Reuters, and Getty Images. She was a 2022 Pulitzer Prize finalist. On May 8th, Keith was arrested while documenting a candlelight vigil in New York City for Jordan Neely, a homeless man who was choked to death on the New York City subway. On video, Keith can be heard identifying herself as a press photographer as multiple officers place her in handcuffs and lead her away, with the New York Police Department Chief of Patrol shouting, "Lock her up." The Manhattan District Attorney has dropped charges against the protesters, but did not against Stephanie. Vizzions and Keith met while documenting Standing Rock protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. Thank you.
Hello. Anyway, no, I appreciate it. Thank you, Sid. As you can see, this is what I was getting at. I've been in a van for 3 years on the outskirts of society, and so I'm pretty out of touch with people. So
there we go. Okay, so we have Ryan and Stephanie with us tonight. It's a huge honor for us. They really have been our heroes among so many photojournalists that came before them. And it's a wonder that anyone pursues this career given what people are up against, which only increases with every year. And so I'd like to ask both Ryan and Stephanie some questions, and we'll have some time for your questions afterwards. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Ryan, I'll start with you. I think a lot of people are interested in learning about what drives people towards not only photojournalism, but activism in spite of the risks, discomfort, and often danger. Can you tell us what drove you to immortalize the struggles of the Lakota Sioux at Standing Rock?
thanks. That's a really deep question. I think for everybody it's a little bit different. But I think there is a circular in that conversation when it comes between photojournalism, journalism in general, and activism. And that is that we all have a duty to look out for each other and try to do what's right in this world. And if that means showing up and putting your feet on the ground, that's what you have to do. I think from the perspective of photojournalism, we have an obligation and a responsibility to not only raise awareness of what is taking place today in society, but also continue to provide material and information and educate the future generation so they understood what happened today. We've discussed it many times, Michelle and I, and said that, the moments today are the history of tomorrow. And so we have to provide the information to create a course forward to move towards progress and be where we want to be in society. And that is my take on it. Other people may have different takes, but I think it's really important that we not only look at ourselves, but we also make sure that those who come after us understood where we stand, and they can move and manipulate off of that and hopefully progress as society moves on.
Thank you. Stephanie, for 20-some years, you've worked as a photojournalist covering all aspects of the city, the country, documenting and immortalizing the oppression of both the indigenous communities and women's civil rights injustices. And I wonder if you could answer a similar question. What drives you in spite of the risks? How do you navigate the chaos and combustible dynamic of a protest? As a journalist, was this always something that you felt was a calling?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I guess when I was in my 20s, before I was a photographer, I was an activist. And for me, I feel like there's a big difference between a journalist and an activist, even though they might be standing next to each other at a protest. An activist is about trying to change what's going on, and the journalist really is documenting what's happening. So when I was an activist, I was very passionate about a lot of issues. And when I became a journalist, those feelings of trying to right the wrongs of injustices just stayed with me. And I think you either have it like in your blood or you don't. Either you're dedicated to it or you're not. Because as you said earlier, there's, not tons of compensation for doing what we do. And so except for the feeling that maybe our photos will change the world, or maybe our photos will help people see an issue more clearly. I mean, so many times photos do that. They do serve that function in political discourse. And so I feel that people want that when they have their own work. They want their work to, help, change the world. And, that's some powerful stuff right there. And I think I first got involved with photographing protests and being a journalist at protests during the Occupy Wall Street. And I documented that a lot. And, at the very beginning of it, it was very idealistic. And people would always say, oh, another world is possible. And thinking of that idea that another world is possible, that, that is really powerful stuff. You really want the world to be a better place. And then when I was at Standing Rock, that whole idea, another world is possible, I really felt like I was living it. Like at Standing Rock, where people, the way it was, I really felt like I had the opportunity to actually live that other world that was possible. And so I really appreciated that about Standing Rock. And that's what keeps you going, even though you're, threatened with arrest, or you have to carry your gas mask with you, or people are like knocking you down or spraying you with mace or whatever it is. Those much deeper feelings keep you going.
And what was this world like that was possible?
Well, maybe Ryan could start with answering that, and then I'll continue.
Hey, Stephanie.
Hey, Ryan.
Oh, there we go. It's hard to put into perspective what the Standing Rock movement was if you weren't there. I don't think there will ever be anything, I'm about to cry, like that. You know, it was another world. There was a point when everything got attention to where everything we needed to stay out there came. Food, clothing, shelter, each other. Doctors came and took care of children. Harvard professors came to teach at the children's school. There was 10 kitchens. All the women were competing who made the best fry bread. And everybody had a job. You know, and we all knew our roles were important, whether it was working for the media team or chopping wood. Chopping wood kept people alive in the winter. And people came in there and dropped their egos, and we came and we stood for the same reasons, and we documented what was taking place. And I remember one point we were sitting on the hill, and I was talking to somebody, and they said, you know, this is the freest place in the world. We had our own security, made sure everybody was safe. The police wouldn't come in, and we took care of our own. And this wasn't 40, 50 people. This is 10,000 people. And it was a once in a lifetime thing. And I don't know if that will ever be recreated. And it was another world where you saw we were existing outside the scope of capitalism. And it was all about pushing forward together for human civil rights. And it was a beautiful moment. Back to you, Steph.
Well, for me, there's this concept in a lot of more alternative communities for like mutual aid. So instead of there being like this hierarchical system where the one person decides and other people impose their decision upon you, whatever, it was this sort of collective decision-making process, and this collective like I have this, so I'm going to give it to you, and you have that, and I need that. And that is literally seeing society function on the principles of mutual aid and not capitalism was something that I'd never seen before. I mean, I've seen mutual aid operate with a little bit here and there within a capitalist structure, but I've never seen an entire society literally function on mutual aid. And which, you know, and Ryan was saying that, you know, everybody had job, you know, work or jobs, but the thing, everybody just came together and did what needed to be done. So it wasn't like you had a job, you know, you did what you felt needed to be done. You did the work. But you didn't have a job, you know. So it was free in that sense that, you know, you were able to follow your heart and do the work you wanted to do to make that society work, you know, and you had no constraints and everybody was supportive and respectful. And, you know, I agree with Ryan. I've never seen something operate on such a large scale like that before. And I hope I see it again in my lifetime, but I'm not sure if I will.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about how an undertaking that big and I'm certain not seamless, but seemingly cohesive and collaborative. If you would start, Ryan, what struck you about what was necessary for the organization to meet the needs of an ever-growing population and a combustible situation as far as safety goes, with the threats kind of mounting on the perimeters?
You maybe go a little bit more into that? That's a lot, man.
Well, I think that we would all appreciate understanding, first of all, who began the movement.
Sure.
And whose concept what flourished as the movement grew. At that time, the largest civil rights protest in our history. That takes a lot of organization and discipline. I know there were morning meetings that were essential. And I think we'd all like to hear what you both found there.
Sure.
And maybe took with you forward for other successful movements.
Yeah. First off, let me switch on. I didn't want to start. Oof.
Stephanie, do you want to start? Would you do that for us?
Can you just refresh me the
Yes,
topic?
absolutely. I'd like to hear how you were personally struck by the organization of this undertaking. I know the women who started the movement and how the growth was managed. And you may not have been struck. I have a feeling that you were. And I'd love to hear your perceptions of that. And yeah, I'd love to hear about what an undertaking that large and constantly growing and dynamic was handled.
Yeah, when I got there, I think in the beginning, just the end of October. So it was pretty large by the time I got there, and it grew over the month of November considerably. And basically, I mean, I don't know if I'm an expert to talk about this, but it seemed like to me that it was based on like Lakota structures. Like it was based at that point on a group of elders, and what the elders said, that's what happened. And there was really no, they would discuss, and I really respected that. I really enjoyed being in a Lakota system, like a different system than the regular American system. And I remember one time there was a protest going on just to the east of the camp. There was a little hill that the police were always standing on top of. And it was a real flashpoint with the protesters. And one time they went over the little river to the hill, and the police were tear gassing the protesters. And then somebody showed up and said, the elders said they don't want you protesting in this way today. And the protesters literally stopped what they were doing and came off of the hill and like left. And I was just like, whoa, so impressed by that the elders, maintained such order and, commanded such respect. You don't really, that doesn't really happen in American society. And I saw that again and again. That I remember another time someone saying, oh, well, the elders are going to be meeting today. And then at the end of the day, they'll let you know what the next move is for the protest. And, I'm sure there was much more of an involvement, but it was, just a group of people that had kind of just taken upon themselves to become the decision making. And it seemed to happen sort of naturally. And so it was very different. There was no like election or whatnot. It was very run by Lakotas, in the Lakota way?
There was a point when a radio got stolen by Tiger Swan, who were mercenaries for Dakota Access Pipeline. Tiger Swan was kind of built out of the ashes of Blackwater, Special Ops, Delta Force, and they stole the radio. And as Stephanie was mentioning about the elders, over time there became the inside joke at camp when the question was, which elders? Because the radio would consistently be used by the mercenaries to create confusion on the front lines. And so I'm glad I got my cry out of there. You know, I've been holding that in all day. I wanted to, so the movement started with just a couple dozen people, Lakota, who came to Standing Rock. One of them became my auntie, and that's Joy Braun. She passed away last year. Joy was the first person to put a teepee down at Standing Rock. Standing Rock was an indigenous-led movement. Over 150 tribes hung their flags. And I want to make it very clear that we, as allies or whoever we were just there to support. And it was a Lakota-led movement. It was an indigenous-led movement. There was one point during the movement where, early on, where I almost died. And Joy came to me and she said, you know, you're my family, and she had my back. Believe it or not, it was not always easy to cover that story. We were targeted by psychological warfare from these mercenaries. We were going up against a $3.5 billion pipeline, unlimited resources. But at the same time that Joy Braun and Wayaka Eagleman and Paula Antoine and LaDonna Brave Bull and these folks began to set up at Sacred Stone Camp, which was still on the reservation, the youth runners were the people who inspired the movement. They ran from reservation to reservation to try to get people involved. They ran to Omaha, Nebraska to ask the Army Corps of Engineers to stop the Dakota pipeline, stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. And when they were ignored in Omaha, Nebraska, they ran all the way to Washington, D.C. to the footsteps of Barack Obama. And by the time they came back, the word had spread all across, and there was a movement taking place. The structure at Standing Rock was always indigenous-led, matriarchal-led. It was very important to make it known that it was the women who started that movement and really kept everybody grounded. As Michelle had mentioned earlier, there was a huge morning meeting, every meeting, to make sure that people who came into camp, newcomers that came into camp, understood whose movement that was and where we stood in those movements. I spent 2 months running the media check-ins camp, and whether or not you wanted to take a photo with your cell phone or you were a journalist. That's where actually I think I first met Stephanie, was at the check-in. Whether you were CNN or just a college student that was interested, there were things that you had to understand that you could document and you couldn't document. Sacred fire was off limits. Children, you know, the medical tents, prayer, these were all things. And for the most part, people understood that. Now, there was times that people decided that they were going to do whatever they're going to do, and we removed people from camp. But it was, as I said before, it was indigenous-led, and it was always that way. And elders played a huge part of it. Matriarchal leadership played a huge part of it. But everybody had a role in it. You know, the security was led by veterans who protected this country. But it was organized chaos in a sense, because there was definitely leaders. Joy Braun, she would have your back if she loved you, and boy, would she be your worst nightmare if you didn't. And but over time, the people that were there for a long term really began to trust each other and understood the intentions of each other, and we were able to work across racial lines and cultural lines. And yeah, that's.
Yeah. Stephanie, what brought you precisely from New York to Standing Rock?
Um, well, I think I'd always been interested in Native American issues and culture. You know, I studied anthropology in college, and I'd spent some time living in the Southwest after I graduated, and visited like every pueblo in New Mexico. And so I always felt like I wanted to get back to doing that. And I was, came to photography a little bit later. I was in my 30s when I switched careers. And I guess after I documented Occupy Wall Street and realized how important protest movements were to me, when I saw there was a Native American protest movement, I knew I had to go out there. It was just absolutely necessary. And I went out there just thinking that I would only stay for a week because I would run out of money. And then I ended up getting an assignment from Reuters. So I was there for 6 weeks and filing to them every single day. And it was really intense, being that, having to work that intensely every single day to, have something to file. And I really loved it. I thought it was amazing.
And what about you, Ryan? What brought you from Atlanta to North Dakota?
Amy Goodman, in a sense. In 2015, I started getting involved using my photography more in the realm of documenting what was taking place with activism with Black Lives Matter in Atlanta. In 2016, both Alton Sterling and Philando Castile were killed. And that was a really big awakening to how important it was to show up and tell these stories. And one night on Facebook, I saw a video of some Lakota being bitten by security dogs, and it was covered by Democracy Now! And Amy Goodman. And I was outraged. And I half jokingly made a post on Facebook, and I said, I was working at a restaurant at the time, bussing tables. I wasn't a photographer. I was a photographer, but it wasn't any kind of career. And somebody said, I'll fly. I made a post on Facebook. I said, does anybody want to fly me out there to find out what's happening? And someone I've never met before in my life said, I'll fly you out. And then it was, oh well, shit, I gotta go now. So 2 days later, I landed in Standing Rock, and I hitched a ride from Bismarck to Standing Rock, and I didn't know anybody there. I paid somebody $100 to pick me up from the airport. And when I was there, it was in early September. It was super calm. There was no conflict like what took place later. There was, what the security dogs, but what I saw there was, it was a camp of peace and prayer. It was every night you would go to sleep to dozens of campfires and Lakota prayer songs happening. And it was a magical experience. And listen, I'm a white dude from the South, man. I was like enthralled. I was like, wow, what is this? But I knew something special was happening there. You could just feel it in the air. There was so much power taking place there in such a peaceful form. And so I said, man, this is where I need to be. And so I came home. Oh yeah, I didn't tell my job I was going to North Dakota. So they're like, where are you? I said, I'm in North Dakota, dude. Can't come in.
Coming in tomorrow.
So I came home and I put in my notice, and I raised some funds through friends in Atlanta, and I went back and I said, this is where I'm gonna be. And, as Stephanie was saying, where she started off as an activist and then became a journalist, I showed up there to stop the Dakota Access Pipeline. I didn't show up there I'm a photographer, so I carried a camera, but I didn't go there to try to tell a story. Things just happened. Within the second day of me coming back, I ended up being put in charge of checking in media. And within 2 or 3 weeks there, I took Defend the Sacred. And when I posted that, I only intended to be there for a month. And then I had to, come back home and find a job. And then when Defend the Sacred went viral, I posted it on a Facebook page that had 400 followers. Within a week, it had 150,000 followers. And that's where I recognized that I had an obligation to stay, and I had the support of Joy, and I knew that if I stayed on the good side of the matriarchs, I was okay. I said, man, just listen to the women, Ryan. And they gave me, you know, they trusted me enough to help try to tell the story and amplify what was taking place out there. And I ended up staying there for 6 months straight. I left for 2 weeks, one to fly back to Atlanta to put my stuff in storage because I was moving out of my house officially, and one to go to DC to protest the inauguration of Donald Trump because water protectors were going to DC to lock down gates. And I said, I need to be there for that. But other than that, I lived at camp for 6 months. And, you know, when I cried earlier is because I was telling Michelle, you know, it's been 7 years. And I really thought, we've lost some great people: Myron Dewey, LaDonna, Joy, William Brown Otter. And I really thought we would grow old together and talk about these war stories together. But it was family, man, you know? And you can't back down, you know, you got to stand with your family. So that's how I ended up there, from a crazy Facebook post that ended up going haywire, and it changed my life forever. And so, yeah, I'm really honored for my time there, and that's about all I have to say about that. This is a Forrest Gump quote, I can't believe.
So very recently, Stephanie, you were arrested by the NYPD for covering a Jordan Neely vigil. Jordan Neely, as most everyone knows now, a young unhoused Black man in deep crisis, was murdered in a chokehold by Daniel Penny, a white former Marine. Stephanie has given us permission to show her arrest footage, which, as everyone can imagine, is not easy to relive. And so we'll show that now, and I'll come back and just ask you a question. Can you hear it? There's Stephanie. Can you tell us about the circumstances of your arrest and your experience as press, identified as press with your press pass, the experience not only of being apprehended, but unable to plead your constitutional case? And can you tell us, and if you can't, that's okay too, do what you can. Can you tell us about being in the custody of the NYPD? Were there other journalists with you?
Yeah, I was the only journalist arrested that night. I mean, originally it was supposed to be a peaceful vigil at the Broadway Lafayette subway stop, that's where Jordan Neely had been killed. He was killed on the subway platform. So I was on the subway platform originally, and people were crying and emoting, and it was very emotional. You know, just another Black man, unarmed Black, killed by a white person. Just people are just thinking, when is this ever going to stop? And then, you know, we heard that there were arrests happening on street level. So me and my other colleagues ran upstairs, and we saw there was just like chaos in the street, and people screaming. And then you could see the cops forcibly arresting this one person who had like blood all running down their face. And I was just kind of shocked at the scene, to be quite honest. And then we saw another arrest, and then they took the people into the police van, and then there was sort of a lull for a minute, and then people were yelling at the police again. And I was with a colleague, friend of mine. We were on the sidewalk, and then they were arresting someone else on the sidewalk. So he was already in the street, and so were some other, male journalists. And then I, like almost immediately after I left the sidewalk to join them, John Chell, who's the chief of patrol of the NYPD, he's like the number 2 guy in the NYPD, very high ranking, just grabbed me and brought me back into where the police were standing and said, lock her up, lock her up. Like, I really don't know why they would like choose me in that scenario. And they shoved all the other male journalists. My colleague, they hit him really hard, and they grabbed another guy and dragged him down the street and threw him on the sidewalk. And frankly, I think it's completely inappropriate, horrible, reprehensible for the NYPD to treat journalists like that. They're treating us like we are the enemy. They're treating us like we're some, protesters yelling in their face or something, which we obviously are not. We're definitely separate from them, and we're clearly identified and have cameras, and they should really know better than do that. And they do it again and again and again. And my other colleague who I was with, who got shoved really hard by, I'm not sure if it was Chell or another guy, he already has a lawsuit with the NYPD because he was arrested in 2020. So, I mean, definitely just having a press pass in New York City, it doesn't, as a press, doesn't make you feel safe. It doesn't make you feel like that's the card that will, get you out of jail free card or get you on a not arrested card, because people with press cards do get arrested. And I think it must be a training issue or something, that why is the police violating our constitutional rights and arresting us while we're doing our job? I mean, I was arrested in a crosswalk while I was photographing, while I was doing my job. And the only 2 times I've ever had issues with the NYPD, both times when I was photographing a protest and I had cameras around my neck and had a press pass. So, yeah. And so when, right when it happened, it was like this horrible, it was humiliating, really, experience to be handcuffed in front of like the world and all my colleagues. But all my colleagues, they were so incredibly supportive. And that's what really got me through the whole experience, because there was just like a wall of people in front of me all yelling, "She's a journalist, she's a journalist." And then they started yelling, "She's a mom, she's a single mom," They were like, couldn't believe that they had arrested me out of all people. And I spoke to one of the deputy commissioner of public information people. They're the liaison with the New York City, the press. And I said, "Why am I getting arrested? I don't understand." And he said, "I don't know either. And don't worry, we'll figure it out." And that's why I was sitting in the police van, and then the police van doors shut. And then I was like in the darkness, and I just couldn't believe that I was at a protest, I was photographing, and then next thing I knew, I'm handcuffed and sitting in a dark police van. I was like, how did this even happen? So I really feel that the police, there needs to be better training about, First Amendment rights with the police. because that should not be happening. Press should not be in handcuffs. They should not be arrested. They should not be dealing with the arrest. So
Well,
I don't know, I could go on and on, but you know.
I think it made a chilling impression to have chosen you specifically. I think it's internationally brought quite a lot of shame to our pride in having free press. And like so many of these actions, I hope it backfires. I want Ryan to talk a little bit about the danger that you experienced once the protest had ended and how you were targeted. Again, say what you can if you want to. I don't want to put either one of you through the same physical reliving of this, but I think people would be astounded to know how dangerous this job really is.
Sure. I would just like to, I don't think training's gonna fix it. Those cops knew exactly what they were doing. I think every cop knows that freedom of press exists. Everybody loves the Second Amendment and the Constitution. They should know, you know, freedom of press.
First Amendment.
Yeah.
The
If
first.
anybody should know, it's the cops. I don't think it was an accident. It was very intentional, in my opinion on that. So during the Standing Rock movement, I was put in a very vulnerable situation. It was known through Tiger Swan, who I mentioned earlier, who was the mercenaries that were working for Dakota Access Pipeline, that their intentions was psychological warfare. And their first intention was to create a divide between natives and non-natives. That was a easy pickings, right? Like if you're gonna pick a fight, that's probably the easiest one you could do. Just historically, that's how it goes. During the movement, I was targeted through various campaigns because of the reach. I was reaching with my photography and kind of amplifying what was taking place on Facebook. Any given week, I was reaching about 20 million people. And that wasn't good for business for a pipeline. There was a very interesting aspect in that we should discuss, that the way that information gets shared changed on April 1st, 2016. And what I refer to that is, that was the first day that the Standing Rock movement started, but that was also the first day that Facebook Live came live. So what was happening was the police were telling the news that the camps were violent protesters and this and that, and then people were turning into Facebook Live and they were watching these videos of people praying, being shot with water cannons for doing nothing wrong. They didn't really like that. And so as it went on, there was a few campaigns that happened, and then after the movement ended, they started creating their own Facebook pages that they were trying to netizens for peace and justice or something. There was a guy named Robert Rice, who was a propagandist that was working directly for Tiger Swan, and his intention was to make up stories and create divide. And I had left and gone to another camp that was called Little Creek Camp. He put out a video about the drunk native with a knife is threatening to kill people, completely fabricated story. At the end of the video, he put hat tip to Red Hawk. But at camp, I didn't use my real name. I never showed my face till the end. Joy, like I mentioned earlier, made it very clear to anybody who was working within the movement that you didn't show up to build a career off of this. You were there for the movement and you weren't there to make a name for yourself. So until the end, I used a code name, whatever you want to call it. And they put that out there trying to indicate that I was working directly with them. It didn't really work because by that point, everybody knew who I was. But I began releasing names and photos of mercenaries that were there working, because these guys were dumb enough to post their faces on Facebook, and I just thought the world should see. So I got a call from somebody who works inside the government that said, "Your life is in danger." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And he says, "Well, you're not going to get like killed, but you might go to a gas station, somebody might try to carjack you, you might not survive that." And so I had to leave Atlanta, Georgia. I had just come back from Atlanta, Georgia, came back to Atlanta, Georgia, and I had to go into hiding for 2 months. I'm not a photojournalist. I don't have the support system. The drain and the fallout, there's a thing that happens to where you get so used to chaos that normalcy doesn't feel normal anymore. And so you get so addicted to chaos and pain that you don't know how to handle a healthy world. I struggled with drugs and alcohol for years after that. I almost killed myself. Luckily, I had a support system that allowed me to go to therapy. I've been sober for 4 years, and that's kind of what led me on my project now. Is I said, man, what can I do that's like crazy but not traumatic crazy? Yes, try to document the entire country. Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. But that's part of the reason I'm doing it, is that's the only way I can deal with those traumas that came from Standing Rock, is to keep my mind busy and keep myself working on things. And I think that's a lot of, you look at all these photographs around this room, you have Martin Luther King, you have everyday people who are making change. But from a photojournalist standpoint, each one of these photos are snapshots of our memories. We were there for all of them. And sometimes that weighs really heavily on people, because photographs, there's numerous stories, like when a photograph goes viral or famous or things like that, you have to relive that moment over and over and over again for the rest of your life. And you never get to kind of like shed that, right? And so you try to find ways to take care of yourself. And I think that's something that doesn't really get discussed in the world of photojournalism, is that these are our memories and we can't just let them go sometimes. So.
Well, we want to save some time. I hope, Stephanie, you can stay with us. We want to save some time for our guests to ask questions. I do want to say that Sid and I think that you guys have so much guts, but more than that, you are serving your country, and the photos are a way of activating change. They inform and persuade, and the world changes because of them. And we want to thank you both so much. I can pass this mic around. You're up.
Of course, I'm going to say something. I met Ryan 2 weeks ago. My former organization sued for Standing Rock in 2017. So there's a slight preface and then a question mainly for Stephanie, or first for Stephanie. We did Hedges v. Obama in 2012, suing over the NDAA. And I don't know, Stephanie, if you know that case, but the New York Times covered it for a bit. And we were suing over the First and Fifth Amendments. We won handily on the First Amendment. The judge excoriated the US government for attacking First Amendment rights, but we lost in the Second Circuit, and the Supreme Court didn't take it. And just to jump forward, Trump tested our loss in court during Black Lives Matter in 2017 and scooped people up off the streets while denying them access to counsel, so indefinite detention according to the law. So when you talk about constitutional rights, you are so kind to describe the police as not having training, but I have to say I agree with Ryan. They know exactly what they're doing. They absolutely targeted you. And so my question for you, because we've seen this steady devolution in our rights, our constitutional rights and protections since 2012, have you seen these attacks rising from the police? And number one, and number two, do you all have really good First Amendment counsel? Because we do, and we need you to win those cases. We absolutely need you to take them to court, and we need you to win, and happy to support you in that.
Okay, well, I'm totally down for being put into this position where I'm standing for press freedom. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want this, but since it's been thrust upon me, I'm going to take it. basically the NYPD did a dirty little trick on me, and instead of charging me with a misdemeanor, they charged me with a violation, which is like not even a crime. And so now I have to go through summons court, and that's why the DA Bragg was not dismissing my case, because DA Bragg says that he doesn't have any jurisdiction over summons court, just over criminal court, which would be a misdemeanor and a felony and those things. So it's like, I'm not only am I been arrested, but I'm still dealing with it. And when I went to violation court, the violation judge said, well, we just want you to plead guilty to this violation. It's not going to give you a criminal record. You just pay the fine and then it's done and you can move on with your life. And I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that ever. You know, I am never, ever, ever pleading guilty even to a violation for being arrested as a journalist while in a crosswalk while doing my job. I'm not doing that. So we'll see how it plays out, but it might be a first ever trial in summons court in New York City coming up later this summer.
Anybody else have a question? Wow, we must have been thorough.
I wanted to comment a little bit on that regarding just the overall actions of the police outside of the scope of just press. And I want to talk about how there's a big push right now with defunding the police and abolishing the police and all these conversations. The police have to justify why they're getting paid. So they aren't against the idea of instigating a situation where they have to force themselves upon people. Case in point was the 2020 Black Lives Matter after the murders of George Floyd. In Atlanta, Georgia, 15,000 people showed up in Centennial Park to march in honor of George Floyd. They did one march from the CNN Center, which is downtown in Centennial Park, to the Capitol, and then came back around, maybe 45-minute march. The Atlanta police decided that they were going to stop the march with 20,000 people in the middle of the road for no reason. You can imagine after 2 hours of a standstill, people started to get really upset that they weren't allowed to exercise their rights to march. So people started throwing bottles, and it turned into, you know, all out tear gas, rubber bullets, glass breaking. But the police knew exactly what they were doing in that situation, where they were violating people's rights to peacefully march and protest. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that, listen, if the police get sued, it's the taxpayers that are paying for it. What do they have to lose? At the same time, every year they need to justify why they need a larger and larger budget. Create some chaos. Because fear sells, man. And so stepping outside just a conversation of journalism, it's also the basic civil rights of people that are being violated by the police. And it's 100% intentional, at least from my experience. I've seen it happen. And
yeah, and just if I could add, it's absolutely 100%. The First Amendment does not just cover journalists. It covers people who assemble and want to voice their opinion. So all those protesters are also should be protected by the First Amendment, and they're not protected by the First Amendment. And that's a problem.
For those that aren't familiar with Cop City, to continue what she was speaking about, the community that they're trying to build Cop City in is a 75% Black community who has overwhelmingly opposed this taking place. It's being built what's called the Wolani Forest, which has historically been used as a prison farm, slave labor. The city of Atlanta continues to push through. The murder that was being spoken about was by a forest defender named Tortuguita, who was shot 57 times by the police, or 57 wounds. The initial reports were that Tortuguita pulled out a gun and fired first and shot an officer, and that was to justify that was their justifying for killing him. But as an independent autopsy showed that there was absolutely zero gun residue on his hands. That doesn't really get covered. The first part came out and made all the news, but the second part, you know, that just didn't get covered. And I agree with you 100% that Cop City is a huge issue, and if everybody can take some time tonight and read up on it, that would be really important. Thank you for that.
So we have a time for a couple more questions. I mean, obviously, you can all stay and talk, but I want to turn the air conditioner on and allow everyone to see the photos that we're talking about. So Judy?
Hi. I don't know if I really have a question, but more of an observation. So many of the photos in here are of Black and brown people struggling for freedom and equal rights, and, you know, things that have, struggles that have been going on for so long. And recently I came upon a book called American White Lash by, oh shoot, his name is Wesley something. But yes, thank you. Anyway, I think, you know, I don't know what you think, but in your observations as you go and take photos, I feel that we are really in a kind of Civil War point 2.0, and that the situation that happened with you, Stephanie, and I'm sorry I came in late, so I don't know your last name, but you are part of a larger fascistic battle. And I just wondered if you had any comment about what you see is going on in the greater picture that has especially become magnified since Trump came along, as if it
Yeah.
unleashed
Yeah, I mean, I agree with something that Ryan said earlier, and a lot of the protesters say this too in New York City. Talking about is that the people will be protesting, or they might be yelling in the streets or whatever, you know, but you know, so what? They're not doing anything, you know, harmful or anything. And then as soon as the NYPD shows up, that's when all hell breaks loose. You know, I feel like, if I may speak freely, I feel like the NYPD, I think they're really addicted to violence, you know, and I think sometimes the only thing that really satisfies them is to do some violent arrests. Then they feel like, you know, sort of sated for the moment, you know, and I think on my arrest, the guy who ordered my arrest was just so angry that the protesters had been on the subway tracks a few days previous and blocked some trains, that he felt that the city is sort of getting out of control a little bit, even though like just doing a protest like that should be like, okay, they protested, they stopped the trains, like, you know what, for a couple of minutes to 15 minutes, no biggie. But he was so angry about that, that I think he really needed to, you know, do something about it, like smash that kid's face and arrest me. And, you know, I just feel like I've been on other forums about press freedoms, and people just are at their wits' end wondering, like, what do we do? How do we change this culture of the police acting like that? Like, what do we do about it? I don't know. That's why I mentioned training before.
Hi, my name's Colin, and I just wanted to say thanks a lot for both of you and for this beautiful gallery to give such a good in-person explanation of your guys' work and the difficulties that it was to reach it. You both did photography, but the way you've explained and how well you've explained everything, I could see whether it was photography or film or even painting or journalism. I think both of you would do a great job of explaining these situations and making a big difference. You know, you've done a big difference in photography, but I could see you guys doing it a lot of different ways. but specifically photography, you explained how in that moment you're in danger and there's so much chaos. How much time do you have to frame an image, to set exposure, to do all those pieces? And I recognize that you being there is more important than, you know, getting the perfect image, but I was just curious, as a professional filmmaker and photographer, like how much are you thinking about the photography versus, you know, how much time do you actually get to think about it? Because you guys are in some very serious situations.
I would like to, oh, the photo's not up. Can we pull this? Everybody's familiar with Miss Cleo. I can't speak for Stephanie, but I think this photo, where is it? The photo on the right. I spent 2 hours waiting for that photograph to happen, and it was about 10 degrees outside. There's a thing that happens, I can't speak for everybody, but I think when you get behind the camera in a moment of turmoil, something may switch in your brain and you operate in a different way. You're able to read the environment that's around you for the most part. You're able to pay attention to everything at one time and pay attention to where all these different movements are happening and search out the photographs that will tell the story the most. I think 50, 60 years ago, when we just relied on newspaper, it was heavily important to try to tell the story of what was taking place at any moment in one photograph. And I think you can teach yourself how to do that and to be ultra aware of the situation that's taking place. And for protective reasons, you gotta know what's happening at all times around you. And I think that bleeds into your work. And I think that pretty much kind of guides your composition. But the thing about photographing manual is you do it long enough and it just becomes second nature. You don't even think about it. You just, that's it, you know? But I think there's something that happens to photographers, especially covering conflict or any kind of situation, to where your senses get, you know, heightened, and you're able to read your environment more than normal, I would assume.
As we wind down, Stephanie, would you like to comment on that question?
Oh, well, whenever I have photography students, what I always tell them is that you just have to get, you know, all those settings and everything. That has to become second nature, so that you're not thinking about that. You know, your brain is already, your hands are already moving. You're not even necessarily thinking about that. You're really just focusing on staying calm, because if you panic or get too excited, then you're not going to make any pictures. You're going to drop the camera or get injured or get arrested or something. So you have to just stay really calm, and then just focus, you know, and keep focusing and keep looking. It's all about looking and staying, you know, really calm. Like, and there's all this chaos around you. You have to just stay calm, and so you can keep going.
I think we'd like to thank you, Stephanie, for joining us. And I think it's really important to point out that here we are in Santa Fe, New Mexico, 2,000 some miles from New York City, and we are deeply, deeply invested in your situation and how it plays out. And everybody here is pulling for you and supporting you. And thank everybody. And we have a big audience that's watching us on Zoom as well. So we'd like to thank them for tuning in. Obviously, this is a conversation that can go deep, deep, deep. We've only scratched the surface on some of the issues, but it was a very enlightening evening. Thank you, Ryan. We're going to turn on the lights, turn on the air conditioning, and thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. All right.